Hi there. I'd like to talk to you now about what I call the follow-up to the Great Exchange in Gorazde. And if you haven't seen the Great Exchange in Gorazde vignette, I'd ask you to see that one first, because some of the meaning of this one is lost if I call it the follow-up to the Great Exchange and you haven't seen the Great Exchange. So if I could ask you to look at that first. But to recap, the Great Exchange was very complicated, took a long time to do, and involved huge resources to finally deliver. However, my partner and I were then victims of our own success, and the parties came to us and wanted to talk about a follow-up to the Great Exchange. So, of course, thrilled and not realizing that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, we said, sure, let's get at it. Let's start convening some people on either side, and let's start talking agenda. Let's start talking facts and figures. So we went to the first meeting with the first party, and a bit shocked. They had a very, very restricted agenda. And we said, okay, let us think about it. And then we went across to the other side, and they had the same agenda. And we had been thinking that with all the different bits and pieces we had had in the last one, that we'd be getting into more and more sophisticated humanitarian support. And in fact, the agenda was really, really simple. It was coffee and cigarettes. They wanted to do coffee and cigarettes. And it was really simple. It wasn't an exchange. It was a purchase. The Muslims had lots of money, and the Serbs had lots of coffee and cigarettes, and the Muslims wanted to buy it. There was no medicine for sick people. There was no books for school children. There was no special prescriptions for people who hadn't been able to fill their prescriptions in 18 months, 2 years. It was about coffee and cigarettes. Now, coffee and cigarettes are really important in the Balkans, don't get me wrong. But I was shocked. Now, at that time, the peacekeeping battalion in Gorazde had changed over. It was still a British battalion, but it was a different battalion. And so I went to see the new battalion commander. I had had 2 or 3 meetings with him. He was maybe 6, 7 days in post. And his people had already had one terrible vehicle accident. And so he was not in the best frame of mind when I went to see him. And he said, what do you want? And I said, well, actually, I've been working with the warring parties on either side of the front line, and they want to do an exchange. He said, oh, really? What's the nature of the exchange? And I said, well, the Muslims would like to buy coffee and cigarettes from the Serbs. And the tent went very quiet. He just looked at me in a way that would have shrunkled me normally, but he was new to Bosnia. And he said, my predecessor told me that you were a bit of a dab hand at this exchange thing. Now, am I right that you're telling me that I'm to put my men in harm's way in order for you to conclude what is essentially a black market deal in coffee and cigarettes? And I said, Colonel, please, this is not a black market deal. These are the official local authorities on both sides of the line. Yes, it's a commercial deal, but please don't ever refer to it as black market again. Just as well he'd used that phrase, because I would have had no comeback otherwise. I felt very grubby about this. I didn't feel good. And again, compounding this situation, the sin of vanity, the sin of ego. How on earth could I, probably the author of the greatest exchange that they'd done, say that I wasn't going to do this simple little exchange? So anyway, we start the process. We start meeting in no man's land. It's very businesslike. The Muslims propose a price for coffee and a price for cigarettes. The Serbs laugh and leave the meeting. We meet again. The Muslims propose a price slightly less. The Serbs laugh and leave the meeting. And so the third time, the Muslims did propose a price, and before the Serbs could say a thing, I say, I would ask that you negotiate and not leave the meeting. And they looked at me as though I had done something bad on the floor. Who was I to stick my nose into the negotiation? And I said, well, actually, I'll tell you who I am. I'm the only guy who can get the British soldiers to provide security for whatever you decide to do. So that's my status in this court. Oh, didn't like that. So they stayed at the table and they hammered and hard and hummed and heed and hooed. Long story short, after about 6 weeks of hammering and hawing, they came to something under the normal black market price around the bazaars, and they agreed on quantities, and therefore they agreed on a total price, which was in the couple of €100,000 range. So I thought to myself, well, I'll be thrilled to see this happen. Sure enough, on the day of the great race, to the no man's land point arrives a brand new Mercedes, no number plates of course. A young man, very fit, of military age, short hair, gets out, he's the driver, he pops the hood of the car, puts 2 clips on the battery, puts the hood down, and puts a money counting machine on top of the hood. From the Muslim side, one guy with a bag with 2 very tough young guys with short hair either side of him steps up, and in the bag there are wadges of €500 notes. 2 trucks draw up. The 2 tough guys go round to the first truck, open the back, go in and start randomly opening boxes to check. The young guy with the Mercedes puts the first wadge of euro notes in the machine. The machine counts the notes. The guys get out of the first truck, get into the second truck, open, slip boxes, do this, do that. They come together. They agree. To the euro, the price has been paid. To the gram, the coffee. To the cigarette, the number of cigarettes. The guy who's in charge of the money counting machine says to the Muslims, if you want, my trucks will drive just to the outskirts of the town where you can then unload the boxes there rather than have your guys carry it back. And I will wait here as a, sign, and we will leave together, the two empty trucks and me. And do I have your word? No problems will occur. You have our word. The 2 trucks drive just into the town. Boxes are unloaded. Trucks turn round, come out. There hasn't even been a ribald joke thrown at these guys. This is a business meeting that could have happened anywhere throughout Europe. Off drives the Mercedes and the 2 empty trucks. Our guys go to the warehouses, and I go, and with great relief, I say to the Colonel, your guys did extremely well. Fortunately, there was never a sign of anybody producing a gun or going crazy or doing this, that, and the other. Thank you very much. By this stage, his people had suffered a second really terrible, fatal car accident, vehicle accident with these stupid, useless Saxons. And he said, thank you. Don't ever ask me to do that again. I said, Colonel, I understand your feelings, but all of us have to do things that we find a little bit distasteful. Anyway, he and I got on pretty well after that, and I even met him after the war, and we could have a laugh and a drink. But the most instructive case came when I was back in Bosnia as a Deputy High Rep between 2002 and 2006. A British brigadier was visiting in Banja Luka, where I was, and he and I got talking over a glass, and he said, my people were in Gorazde. And I said, that's funny, because I was civil affairs in Gorazde. And he said, I would like to go down and check that the monuments to the soldiers killed in the vehicle accidents are still there. And I said, and I would like to go down and see that as well. So I said, we can either travel by car. He said, no, I'm going to take a helicopter. I can't, take all that much time. And I said, well, I'd like to have a weekend in Sarajevo. So if you don't mind, I'll drive down and I'll meet you in Gorazde at a time that you say, and we'll do the sights together because I kind of know my way around that town. And he said, fine, excellent, well done. And off he went to the tippity top of the jolly old hill. I jumped in my car with my wife. We went down to Sarajevo. She had friends, relatives, whatever in Sarajevo, had no intention of coming to eastern Bosnia with me. And I went down to Gorazde. And whilst I was waiting for the helicopter, I thought, I'll go and look up some old bugs. And I asked the first people on the street, where would I find Nefisa? Now, Nefisa was the interpreter for UNHCR during the war. Everybody in Gorazde knew Nefisa. She was not a young woman, but not an old woman, and very much the figure through which all rumours passed. So I was told exactly immediately where she was. I went round, screaming and crying, hugging, kissing, good to see you again, blah, 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 blah. And so the coffee comes out and we're talking. And I said, Nefisa, can I tell you something that I feel a bit bad about? She said, sure. She's quite shocked. She's leaning forward. She's quite interested. And I said, Nefisa, do you remember we did that deal for the coffee and the cigarettes? And she said, do I remember? I said, I've always felt a bit bad about that it was somehow wrong. And she said, Mr. Graham, I always liked you and I always knew you were, quite an intelligent guy. But for an intelligent guy, you can be really stupid. That was the best thing you did whilst you were in Gorazde. Well, if you'd had a feather, you could have knocked me down with it at that point. I said, what do you mean it was the best thing I did when I was in Gorazde? I got people released from jail. I got humanitarian convoys. She said, yeah, of course you did. But the coffee and cigarettes, you don't understand. We have this special word in Bosnian which means complete happiness. It's chafe. And when you have your chafe, whatever it is, your complete happiness, you can't get any happier. She said, do you know, you did release tens and eventually 100 plus prisoners. Do you know how many people you brought chafe when that coffee and that cigarette that everybody could afford, no longer black market prices, sold by the town authorities at proper prices? Do you know how many old people finally had a cup of proper coffee after all those years of war? Do you know how many people had that first drag on that proper cigarette, not herbs foraged from the hills, during the war? You were a hero in this town for doing that. You brought thousands and thousands and thousands of people chafe. I was flabbergasted. That's how out of touch I was with what really was important to the guys. And I lived amongst them and I chatted with them on a daily basis and I understood a lot of other things, but I never really got chafe. So anyway, you see those Marlboro packets and those coffee packets? I stopped feeling guilty about it after that. This is probably the first time I've really bragged about it. But yeah, it's amazing what you do if you follow the people. And this is the big lesson of all of this. You are there facilitating them. The star of the show is them. You are never the star of the show. You may be the facilitator. You may be a good guy. You may be intelligent, but really stupid. It works. It happens. It's all about them. So anyway, that's the story of the coffee and cigarettes, the follow-up to the Great Exchange. Let's have a little look at, without beating it to death, the Cynefin framework and the follow-up. Obviously, in the obvious domain, keeping the contact alive between the two parties is absolutely fundamental. Now, the big lesson in the complicated domain, this is the not knowing chafe. The two parties, the conflicting parties, will know each other way better than you will ever know either one of them unless you were born there. And that's a fact. All the internationals who think that they knew, oh, they were in Bosnia, they knew. I was in Bosnia during the war. I was in Bosnia after the war. I married a Bosnian. I still don't know. I know some things, but I don't know, because I don't feel chafe. I don't think chafe. And they did. Okay. It's very important that the parties make and then police their own agreements. You can't police them, and you should never offer to do so. You should never offer to act as guarantor. You say to the table, I am but one international. You guys must guarantee each other's safety when your parties cross. You must guarantee that there's this many X and that many Y. If that's what you want, I am just here to witness and to report to the world who broke their word. That's my job. They don't like that. The issue of conflicting values. This is what I call the Nafisa effect. It doesn't matter what I think is the right or wrong thing to do. It does to me. It doesn't to them. They have their values. And when the two values don't jive, always, 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 local values win. It's their society. It's their village. It's their people. It's their hunger. It's their kiddies dying. Don't put yourself in a bigger place than you really are. Okay. Finally, I think that we can honestly say that if we had failed to keep that deal as it was, there'd have been a huge setback in confidence. There would have been all of the gains of the Great Exchange would have mattered for very little, because the Great Exchange just kept people alive. This gave people chafe. And again, I keep coming back to it because I knew about the word. I had heard it many times before, but I hadn't felt it. I didn't know it on my skin. And this is the point. If you're facilitating, then facilitate. Don't get too big for your boots and think that you're driving. You're not. You're a passenger in their vehicle. You're just facilitating the good behavior between the two parties, three parties, however many parties. And that really is all I ever want to say about the follow-up to the Great Exchange in Gorazde.